Hi everyone, and today with us we have James Bartle. James Bartle is the CEO and founder of Outland Denim, which is a fashion company on the vanguard of the socially conscious manufacturing movement. So welcome, James.
Hey, thanks Martina, appreciate you having me.
James, could you please tell us more about yourself and the company Outland Denim?
Yeah, sure. Well, look, our company, our brand is about 5 years old now, but we've been working for the last 10 years to try and find solutions to some of the world's greatest issues that we face today, and that being social injustice and also environmental degradation. And we believe that the fashion industry is one of the greatest ways to combat both of these things. And in fact, it's not until we combat them both together simultaneously that we can actually have a real chance at solving some of these big issues. And so for us, what that looks like is we work with women that have either been vulnerable or been exploited and sold into slavery of some kind. And we give them opportunities to be able to create a very different future through starting with living wages and building up from there, and training and education, and coming in to learn the craft of denim making. And we've seen over a period of time how this completely changes somebody's life and their family, how it impacts communities. And then how do we create jeans in a way that's much more environmentally sustainable? And can we innovate and change the future so that our products actually don't leave a negative footprint at all, but leave a positive one? And so ultimately that's the mission of our business, is to be able to create products that activate a cycle of freedom for people and leave the planet in a better position as a result of making it.
And that's really amazing. Where are you producing these products, and which is the community you're working on and supporting?
Yeah, well, we're an Australian-based company, and we have 2 manufacturing facilities based in Cambodia. Cambodia is the country that we chose to work in. There was a lot of poverty 10 years ago when we started working toward this project, and it's a place where there's huge amount of opportunity to be able to see this social change through these kinds of enterprises like Outland Denim.
And if you had to say, what's the real mission and vision of what you are doing in the company?
Look, our ultimate goal, our vision, is to be able to create this cycle of freedom for humanity, so that the fashion industry will be encouraged and spurred on to become the solution rather than the problem. And at the moment, it's unfortunately the problem. It is highly exploitive. I think the most recent statistics would say that only 2% of all garment workers are actually paid a living wage. Exploitation is rife at the moment, and our vision is to be able to combat that along with the environmental sustainability of the fashion industry. And so we know we're one small player in it, but we believe that we still have a lot of influence in our industry to be able to spur us on to create better and better impacts through our business.
I definitely love the term socially conscious manufacturing movement, because it's like a movement, is an attitude towards the way you're working and the way you are trying to create products and value. But I want to ask you, how do you, first of all, find these people that need help in Cambodia? Because that's not, that easy. And how can you effectively say you're helping them and seeing the result?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, we work with non-government organizations that specialize in the identification and rescue of young women predominantly, that have been exploited in a range of different ways. They may have been enslaved in a garment factory, or they may have been sold for other reasons. And our job is to work closely with these organizations to identify those that need this kind of support. And then it's all about data. It's all about collecting data over a period of time to be able to really observe whether this kind of business model has the impact that we dreamed it would. And so we've been doing that for a long time now, and we can absolutely say that if somebody comes into employment with Outland Denim, works within the system where they start with a living wage, they have the opportunity to acquire new skills, to become experts at what they do. So not just learning how to make one aspect, but how to make everything, which means that they're no longer dependent upon us. They become independent seamstresses that can get jobs elsewhere if they choose to. And then education. So how do we, if they come to work, what are the education gaps they've got? It might be Khmer literacy. And so our job is then to be able to provide opportunities for them to learn to read and write, or speak another language like English, or women's health, and a range of different things. And so when they're coming to work, this is part of going to work, is filling these educational gaps in their lives. And then when they've got these things, they've learned how to deal with money better, plan for the future, you really see a massive change in their lives. And I think one of the greatest changes to highlight is that dignity, like it's dignified work, creating incredible outcomes, not for them just personally, but also for their families and communities. And so I think because we've monitored this for over 10 years, I mean, we were in a development phase for 5 to 6 years before we launched the Outland Denim brand. And we knew when we took this brand to the market that we already had the ability to have this kind of social impact. And it gave us great confidence in taking our products out there to the world, knowing that all we now needed to do was align people with the same values as us with our product.
You said a lot of interesting things. There's a lot of questions I'd like to make you. Because first of all, you said dignity is like, I was questioning myself, what is the thing, the need they really have? Is that about a dignifying work? Is that about the community that supports them? Is that about the need for education? Is that about the need for employment? So is for decent work?
Yeah, well, Martina, I think if you think about it like this, think about times in maybe your own life or someone you know where you've been hand to mouth, so to speak. All you can think about is, how do I pay that next bill? For a lot of these people that we employ, all they can think about is, how do I feed my family tomorrow? So when you're in a cycle of poverty like that, where you can't really plan for the future because you don't have enough capacity to think that far because you're so concerned about feeding your family tomorrow, it makes it very difficult to ever break the cycle. And therefore, that's why this model is so important, because they come in and they earn more, so they can start to pay down debts if they've got debts. They can feed their families. And I think, the definition of what a living wage is so fundamental in just being a basic human right. If you're working, you should be paid a living wage, meaning you can pay your rent and you can save for the future, and you can have healthcare and education, all these basic things. Unfortunately, most of our industry doesn't pay a living wage. And like I said before, only 2% of our industry are paid a living wage. And so it's really, really important that it starts there. What that does then is just opens up, frees brain space for them to actually start to think about things beyond being fed tomorrow. And I think that's what I find so exciting about this project, is that, it's not because of the good doing of Outland Denim at all. It's because of the hard work and good doing of every individual that works there. And that's why I said before, like, dignity is really still this dignified work. So the need for everybody is slightly different, but at the foundation of all of it, it's combating poverty and giving them the space to be able to make their own decisions, to make good and bad decisions, to have success and fail. Just like all of us have that privilege of being able to make good and bad decisions and succeed and fail. I think that, unfortunately, when you're so deeply entrenched in poverty, it's very hard to have that kind of freedom.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And you also said that the majority of these people are women, because in the fashion industry, there are mainly women that are the garment workers. But what is the role of women in Cambodia today?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's statistically proven that the role of women right across the world is key to having a successful and thriving family. And I say that because when women earn a wage, there's a much higher percentage of that wage that'll make it toward education and caring for the family than if a man earns that wage. And I mean, that might be surprising to some people, but unfortunately that is the statistic. And so if you really want to combat and impact a community, I think the fastest way of doing that is through women. Now, not to say that men don't have a huge role to play in this, they absolutely do, and they don't get off scot-free. And in fact, there's a lot of work that needs to be done around the education of men and the role that they play within the family and the home. And But I think in our case, and we employ men and women, but in our case, we can absolutely see examples of how families are completely changed as a result of a young woman now having this opportunity, earning this much higher income than she's earned before, given the skills to be able to manage it well, to then be able to see that flow out, not just to a family, but into the community in this concept of paying it forward. You know, I mean, we've all probably seen the movie Pay It Forward, but what a beautiful movie and concept. If someone does something nice for me, I'm going to do something nice for somebody else. And if we all did that, how the world would change quite rapidly. Well, we see our staff doing that for strangers and helping strangers and getting reports of this. And so I think you start to see how this thing then scales itself just by activating this cycle of freedom within these young women.
This circle of freedom, I'm going to note that word. And yes, that's absolutely right. And from how you speak, it seems that being a B Corp is something that has always characterized the way you are working. You're working with a non-profit organization. So the question, rather than being why you are a B Corp, should be why are you a profit company and not a non-profit company?
Yeah, great question. Look, I started as a not-for-profit, and the reason I started as a not-for-profit was because I felt that it was the most purest form of being able to be cause-driven in what I did. And over time, I guess I was persuaded through just the operations of a business and trying to function and have capital to grow and, you know, to scale the impact of this, that a for-profit business was going to be a much better model for us. And so we changed to a for-profit. And at that point in time, I was able to start to bring investors on. And that completely changed the dynamic of our business. It gave us momentum that we would never have been able to get without it. And so today I'm such a huge advocate for-profit business being used in a way that is addressing some of these kinds of issues or any issue. And so B Corp was a big part of that decision because I didn't want to, I didn't want there to be any public perception that this wasn't a genuine and real thing. When I saw B Corp, and in fact here in Australia, I had to wait a year before it all went through and the legislation was passed for the B Corporation to be available to us as an Australian company. So I waited that time and I had made those changes, and then we went through the application process, and it's been an amazing thing to become a B Corp. And the reason I say it is an amazing thing is because when you go through the auditing process, it highlights areas you've not thought about before. And our goal as a business is to be as powerful as possible in the impact space, and B Corp was able to identify areas that we can still improve in.
When was it possible? When was this law approved in Australia for allowing you to become B Corp?
Martina, you're asking hard questions now. I'm not exactly sure.
No, I'm asking that because I know that in Italy it was like not that many years ago. We're speaking about less than 10 years. So it's clear that the governments are not supporting companies that want to bring social impact and the environmental impact on the community, because it's like not the normal way of doing business as it is perceived in the past.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think business has been operated on this slippery slope for a long time now, and it's good people have forgotten to measure important things, and we found ourselves where we've got a balance and a P&L, a balance sheet or a P&L that only measures the economic impact of a business. And I find that frustrating because the value in our business isn't the economic. That's just a third of the value in our business. And what I'm excited about now is that this is quite a unique time in history, I believe, because I think that, there's enough of us around that are motivated enough to want to find ways to be able to measure those things so that we can lead something much more stable and real by measuring on our balance sheet and on our P&L, what is the real impact of our business across every area. And I think if we were to go back and we had the ability to do that well right away, we might find that some of the most profitable companies in the world aren't even profitable. And I think that
absolutely right.
that's one of the big steps that needs to be made.
Yes, absolutely. You're totally right, because when I think about even the traditional business model canvas, where's the social value, the environmental value you're producing, what's the impact you're having on the people that are working in the company? Nothing is measured. And that's something that we notice also speaking with the interviewing the other B Corps in fashion. There's something that they all share. They say, we want to become B Corps because we don't know where to go. We want to be, let's say, sustainable or try to have a positive impact. But the difficult thing is that there are a lot of things to do and there is no one clear path to follow. So we want it to be measured, not to say we have a certification, but to say we have a roadmap for making the next step. Otherwise, where do we go?
Absolutely.
Maybe I think that the community has a really big value supporting these companies, because it's not only about I give you the roadmap, but many of them said we have the community that is supporting us. So let's say that we are supporting each other, networking for positive business.
That's right. Yeah. And ultimately, it's a bit of a minefield out there, and it's very difficult to navigate your way through this space of going, which companies can you support and be confident in. And B Corp is as good as it gets in helping you identify those things. Now, let's keep in mind, Outland Denim isn't a perfect business, and there's no B Corporation business that's a perfect business. We've all got still room to grow, a lot of room to grow. So it's more about this progress rather than perfection. But as the community gather around those B Corps and those other businesses that have been identified as having true impact, that's how we move the needle. When we have a greater market share than our competitors, because we align with our customers' values, and that continues to grow, that's how we change the industry. That's how we, for want of a better word, force the hand of those businesses that aren't really motivated by this kind of change.
Do you think that this is going to be a long journey, or do you think that it's going to happen quite fast?
I think it's going to be a long journey. I think we're fighting things that are deeply ingrained in business and in the psyche of the way it's been done in the past, and to grind that out is going to take time. And ultimately, the reason I think it's going to take time is because I don't believe real change happens until your heart changes. I think that the heart of leadership teams in all of these big businesses needs to be challenged. Because unfortunately, we know that most of them now are aware that there's issues within their supply chains. So where is the motivation? Where is the investment? I was speaking to a large company just a week or two ago, and their operations manager of the entire company was responsible for following their supply chain. And they were saying how great they were. And straight away, I was able to, identify that company isn't committed to knowing that their supply chain, or not just knowing it's clean, but identifying areas that there's issues in so that they can help remediate them. Because their operations manager is one responsible for it. They're not prepared to invest into somebody who can manage this for them. And that costs money. There's a lot of resource that goes into that for any business. But this is so important. If we want to be able to say we treat people or planet, and both, hopefully, in the way that they both deserve to be treated, then someone has to be dedicated to making sure that's managed well. And it's a very big space.
You're speaking about what we are doing. So we are trying to support this company to make these difficult supply chain problems, to make them clear to the operations team, because as you said, there is a lot of work that need to be done. And I think that there is not a system right now for tracking the supply chain. And also I think not only once you have tracked your supply chain and measure it, to be transparent and tell to people how you're producing value and what's your value chain. So I want to ask you, because as all B Corps, the B impact assessment is not only about measurement, but it's also about transparency. What's the role in your company of transparency?
Well, I believe that nothing changes and within the context of a transaction. So how do I sell a jean? I sell you a jean if you trust me. And if you trust our product, do you trust our brand? And how do you build trust? Well, first of all, I think you've got to know that our intentions are good. How do you know our intentions are good? Well, you're only going to know that if we're transparent with you, if we're honest with you, if we're prepared to identify the good, but also the bad. And in fact, maybe more importantly, the bad. If we do that, you will start to trust us. And so there's a very, very compelling commercial case for being transparent. Now, if your motivation is just sales, you know, that will come out too because you're transparent and whatever. But and then the other thing is competency, and we need to be competent, and we need to have a great product, and it's got to be of value for whatever it is that the consumer is buying. And so if you combine those two things, you get trust, and therefore that's the most important thing I think a business can get. That's the best kind of equity you can have in your business is trust. And that only, again, comes through being willing to be transparent.
I wanted to ask you 3 best practices you would like to share with the other companies, but you're already sharing them. If you have some other practices you want to add, or the things you have learned throughout this journey, what would they be?
You know, I think one of the greatest things that I've learned, I mean, there's been so many, but I think one of the most powerful ones was that it's okay to fail. So often we get we get paralyzed by this idea of, but what if it doesn't work, and what if it fails, and this whole idea of unintended consequences. And, you know, unfortunately, that's a reality of progression. You know, there will be failure. And if we never try, we'll never change it. And so we look at the issues that we currently have within our supply chains. And the reason they're there is because nobody, it would appear, has tried to change it. And so I would say that be prepared to try. And yes, you might fail, but try again. You know, that's the greatest thing. Also, legacy. Think about the legacy that you individually leave, or your business or your brand leaves behind. And think about your children looking at that legacy one day and going, am I proud of the person who went before me? You know, I think that's a great way of putting the spotlight on your own motivations and what it is you're leaving behind. You know, are you fighting for yourself, or are you fighting for something greater than yourself? And, you know, for me, I'm personally motivated to fight for something that's greater than me. And I'm not perfect, far out. I've got so many flaws, ask my wife, but that is a real motivation. And I think about my children going, oh, I'm really proud of what my dad did, or what my dad tried to do. I might fail, but I want them to know that I had to go, and I had to go at changing something so that their future and the future of all the families who we work with looks very different to what it currently does.
I think you could be a great motivational coach because you're really inspiring. I think you are a people person, inspiring. So
thank you.
Go ahead and try and share that with others. And now there's the tough question, the really tough question. 3 things you have learned to avoid becoming a B Corp, or things you would have done differently.
Things I would have done differently. Wow. Man, probably everything. Don't choose denim. It's a really, really difficult space, very competitive, but that's not actually true. Things to avoid, I think, is you can get very easily dragged into the old way, the way it's done. For us, we've set our headquarters up in a place called Tamborine Mountain, which is on the east coast of Australia in the hinterland, up in the hills, in a very small community. And the reason that we've done this is, one, because I live here and I love it, but 2, because I don't want our business to be in one of the fashion hubs, because I don't want to do it like the fashion industry does it. I want to be very different, because I don't believe that the fashion industry has done a good job. And so that has given us the ability to think differently. So I guess the things I've learned not to do is not to always watch what the industry is doing and try and emulate it. Now, we still do that in lots of areas of our business. And I'm not saying that they don't do lots of things really well and there's lots to learn, but you can fall into a trap there. Yeah, I guess one of the other things, the what not to do is believe that you don't need a plan. And when you start these things, sometimes you think you can sort of wing it. And my personality is a little bit like that. But the power of data and knowing where you're going and what you need to get there is just so important. So, you know, for lots of entrepreneurs, sometimes that part gets pushed to the side because we're so eager to get going. But there's a lot of benefit in slowing down and
measuring,
and putting those things in place and measuring. Absolutely, you know. And then maybe the greatest of all, what not to do is do not prove that your supply chain is clean. I think that's been one of the greatest lessons as well that I've learned, and I learned that through my Impacts Manager. And I had the mindset of, we need to make sure that our supply chain is clean. And she said, but what if we didn't? And what if we went and tried to prove it wasn't clean? And my gosh, it was like this light bulb moment of like, you are so right. Let's stop trying to prove our supply chain is clean and let's try and prove it's not. And it's a very different way about managing a supply chain. And yes, it does expose you as a business. But again, we talked about transparency, and I think that this is so key, is being transparent with our audience about, hey, we found this within our supply chain, and now we're going to do this to try and remediate that issue. I think that's something that's really quite different. And I would say proving your supply chain is clean for the sake of it could potentially just be another form of greenwashing in many cases.
Yes, yeah, that's totally right. Because I think that the majority of the companies working in fashion are trying to speak about sustainability not in a proactive way, but in a protective way. So, and once you are in a protective way, that's also all about, I want to prove that it's clean. Once you are in a proactive way, is okay, let's start saying where's the problem, what we have to change. So I think that what really needs to change is the mindset. So a changing mindset, a change.
I agree.
But I totally agree also that it's going to be a long journey. So let's get to the final question. What changes would you like to see in the fashion industry in the next few years? And what changes do you think will be possible in the next few years?
I'd like to see the amount of textiles ending up in landfill changed. I'd love to see that stop. You know, it's a huge issue right the way around the world. It's something that I'm personally passionate about, and our business is committed to being a part of finding solutions around that. That's really important to us. What do I think is possible? I think anything is possible. I think it's possible that the fashion industry combats poverty in a really powerful way. How do I think that's going to happen? Well, that's going to happen when there's a large enough movement of communities around the world that go and support brands that are actively combating poverty. And, you know, there's an interesting connection between slavery and environmental degradation. And a guy named Kevin Bales, who works at the University of Nottingham, did some research and writes that if slavery were a country, it would be the third largest emitter of CO2 right behind China and the USA. And so it's very, very clear that for us to really combat this environmental issue that we all live within right now, and watching it degrade so quickly, we also need to combat this thing called slavery. And therefore, I think that more of us need to probably connect environmental and social issues together.
Absolutely. How can we respect the planet if we do not respect the people on the planet?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So thank you very much, James. It was extremely interesting, and let's see the next time what we're going to see in fashion.
Sounds good. Thanks so much.